Hey, everybody. We are live as we tape this. We're here on a Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time, and my guest is far away. We are going to have a blast tonight, folks. And if you're watching us, like I said, live, going out to the Truth Be Told Radio Network's YouTube page, Twitch feed, and also our Facebook page. So if you go to one of those three places, you can be watching us live right now. Because we're live right now on a Wednesday night at 7 p.m., let's see, it's the 9th of June as we tape this. That means that you can interact with us. So if you go to the chat areas, you can then type in a question for our guest, and we can get that out live to you. Folks, I'm Kevin Gallagher. You're watching my show. This is Time Out with Kevin Gallagher, and we've been on the air almost 25 years, and we cover a wide range of subject matter. We try to do it with a Christian focus to the best of our ability, and you can go to timeoutyoutube.com. That's timeoutyoutube.com, and you can see all the different shows there. You can go and take the links, copy the links, put them into an email, blast them out to your Facebook page, wherever. That's why they're there. Don't need my permission. Just get the stuff out to the four winds. And folks, you can check us out here live. Well, not so much live, but the pre-recorded shows on a Friday night, 8:30 p.m., Channel 23 in the greater Danbury, Connecticut area. And we also replay the audio of these shows during the time slot for what we do for the TV show, Time Out with Kevin Gallagher, Friday nights at 9 p.m. Be sure to check that out. And we are here with Reverend Bill Schnoebelen. I hope I said that right and didn't butcher it. And he's an American Messianic Christian apologist, author, teacher, and lecturer. Now, he's best known as a strong critic of Mormonism, Freemasonry, and Wicca. Once primarily published by Chick Publications, he has authored publications in over 14 countries. He's founder and director of the Christian-based ministry with One Accord Ministries. Now, Mr. Schnoebelen lived on the dark side for many years. He was a 90th degree Freemason, member of the Illuminati, a Satanic Priest, a Catholic priest, and even more. It's quite a resume. Now, then one day, his monthly tithe check to the Church of Satan came back from the bank with a note on the back saying, "I'll be praying for you in Jesus' name." Within a week, he lost his demonic power. Later, he became a born-again Christian, and he is now active in his own ministry. And Bill has been active with ministry almost full-time since 1986. No one has yet been able to disprove any of the claims that he has made, admittedly, about his rather bizarre history. So, Reverend Bill, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Is there anything that I have not included there that you would like to let people out there know? And also, just as a reminder, if you have questions for Bill, you can get those out into the comment sections on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and I'll make sure I get them over to Bill. Bill, the floor is yours.
Well, I can't think of any. I mean, obviously, I've been through many different things. Yeah. In the course of my rather bizarre career. And no, you hit the high points, but
yes,
it was from the very beginning, I wanted to serve the Almighty. When I was a child, I wanted to be a priest. I was raised in the Catholic Church. And what happened is at a very early age, I think I was 6, I had a heavenly vision in the Catholic Church. But the funny thing was, I turned my back on the Catholic Church to get the vision. I was walking out of the church after we used to have to go to Mass. This is way back in 1956, it would have probably been. And anyhow, to walk out of the church after Mass, you had to turn around and go out. And I saw this light come down. And it was just gorgeous because it was a cloudy day out, so it wasn't from any natural source. And I think I saw a glimpse of heaven. And I heard, and I was only 6, I had no context for this. And I heard this heavenly music in an unknown language.
Wow.
And I couldn't figure out what it was. And it was so profound. Again, I was 6 years old, that I actually wet my pants, which was kind of embarrassing. But it was partly because a nun came up and bumped me and said, "What are you doing?" and shook me and kind of took me out of the whole situation because she thought I was just being a disobedient little boy. And you've, I'm sure, heard stories about nuns and their rulers and whatnot. But anyway, so that was the beginning. And I whatever that was, at that point, I wanted more of it. And I'm sure you can understand that, because it was this ineffable kind of experience. But then along the way, of course, stuff happens. And probably a critical time in my life was, I was about 10 or 11 years old, so it was only a few years later, and it was Halloween. And I and my buddy were out going trick-or-treating on October 31st evening. And this was, of course, long before there was all this worry about strangers picking up little kids and people poisoning, the candy or whatever. So it was a very innocent time, at least I thought it was. And so we're out walking along, and this, all of a sudden, I was looking, it was a beautiful night, and I looked up in the sky and I couldn't see the stars anymore. And instead of stars, I saw this like huge dome of dark leathery things. Like all of a sudden I was inside of this cave, this gargantuan cave. And it was full of like bats, except they weren't bats, they were something else. And they had brilliant ruby red eyes, and there were hundreds of them. And it was like they were hanging from the ceiling of the sky, so to speak. And it terrified me, because I felt at that moment like those eyes were piercing into me, okay? And it gave me sort of an unclean thrill in my soul. And I think at that moment, that is when the devil tried to get in there and touch me and turn me aside from the path of righteousness. He did a pretty good job of it, because back then, my parents were devout Catholics. They had no understanding of how bad Halloween was. They had no understanding about the dangers of letting your child go out, and be under the night sky unprotected. They didn't pray for me before I left the house. It never would have occurred to them to do so. I lived in a small town in the middle of Iowa. So anyway, from that time on, I can track a trajectory of going gradually into weirder and weird. When I was in 8th grade, I was very precocious. I was reading way above my grade level, and the nun knew I was getting bored with the class material. And so she gave me books to read that were, adult, not in the, pornographic sense, but adult level reading. And one of them was called Stranger Than Science. It was by Frank Edwards. I don't know if you know that name or not, but it was what is kind of called a Fortean book, like Charles Fort used to write it. This weird, unexplainable mysteries.
Yeah, I've read a couple of Fort's books. They're pretty wild. And he would cover some of these true, really weird things that have happened in history, where not once but twice, I believe it was in England, where these giant boulders fell out of the sky, but it took them all day to fall because they were falling in slow motion. And that when they actually came in and hit the ground, the dirt even came up in slow motion, but it was with the same impact that as if they were moving at real speed. It was really bizarre. And it not only happened once, but it was documented as having happened twice. That's really weird. And I don't know how you account for that, but we know that it happened. Newspapers covered it. People went out there for hours and watched these things coming out of the sky in slow motion. And Fort covers that. I forget which book, but it's absolutely mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, it's exactly that kind of, it was like that genre of literature. And it fascinated me, as you can imagine. I had stuff in about haunted houses and things like you say, like frogs falling from the sky or, whatever, just unexplained things. And a lot of it was occult related, And so I started experimenting with ESP. I started experimenting with, quote unquote, psychic abilities. And, that's the way the occult works. They try to get you in. It's kind of like letting the camel get his nose in the tent.
Yes.
And before you know it, you're, you are now fully into the occult. And by the time I got to college, I was going to be a priest. And I was in minor seminary at Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa, and which is where they would send their diocesan priests to study, or candidates for that. And anyhow, while I was there, this was the next big thing. I had a priest who was our theology professor. He had a doctorate, I think they call it a licentiate in theology from a Vatican institution. He'd actually studied at the Vatican. And he told me, I was probably 18. He told me that if I really wanted to be a priest, I had to study the occult. Because he told me that, in Catholicism, I don't know how familiar you are with Catholicism, but they used to have this saying, sacerdote est Christus est. The priest is another Christ. And because he's up on the altar, acting like Jesus acted in terms of saying, this is my body, this is my blood. And you have this idea of transubstantiation where he sort of turns the bread into his body and the wine into his blood. That's Catholic doctrine.
Yes.
And so this theologian told me, if you want to be like Christ, you have to do what Christ did and study the occult. He told me that Jesus went to India and studied with gurus, and he went to Tibet and studied with the lamas, up in the lamaseries of Tibet, the Dalai Lama and whatnot. And that he had gone to Egypt and studied with the magicians in Egypt. And then he put all this together statistically to create, the fact that he could walk on water, turn water into wine, the miracles. And I didn't, hear this guy, and back then in the Catholic Church, if a priest told you something, it was true. It was like God speaking to you. And even though this is radically different than anything I had heard from, and I should back up a little to say one thing. We had when I was a senior in high school, a year earlier, we had a new priest come in, young fella, to be our assistant principal. And he was all into liberal theology. And so he started telling the classes things like, the Red Sea thing didn't really happen. Moses didn't really exist. Adam and Eve is a fairy tale. So I was already getting filled with a lot of nonsense, theologically speaking. So, again, the devil was gradually preparing the ground. And these were men of authority. These were men that supposedly were in charge of the care of my soul, and that they were feeding me poison. And mind you, I know, not to freak anybody out that might be listening, but the Catholic Church is not a valid Christian institution. That may be another topic for another show, but there is so much wrong with it. And it's really gotten bizarre in the last generation or two. But so I'm not saying that if I just stayed in the Catholic Church, I would have been fine, because I wouldn't have been fine. But just to clarify that. So this priest, to return to the story, he told me, okay, you go and study the occult. So I want to be able to turn the bread and the wine into body and blood. I want to be able to do the things Jesus did. So back then it wasn't easy. Obviously, it was decades before the internet, but I managed to find books on the occult. And one of the books I found was called The Diary of a Witch by Sybil Leek, who was one of the first witches to come out of the broom closet, so to speak.
Yeah.
And she was the the medium, psychic medium that worked with Hans Holzer. I don't know if you know that name or not, but he was a famous ghostbuster in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and he wrote tons of books about hauntings and all that, and I had read a lot of them. So that's how I came upon her. And she, for the first time in my life, I heard the idea that witches were good, that they weren't evil, warty, green, like the Wizard of Oz witch or the Snow White witch, that they were just normal looking men and women, and that they just worship nature. And that's what this Sybil Leek was telling in this book. So I started, and she said, now get this, because this kind of confirmed what the priest said. She said that Jesus was a witch, and then Mary Magdalene was his high priestess, and that they had a coven.
Oh my God!
Because a coven is supposed to be 13 members. So between Jesus and the 12 apostles, that made 13.
Wow.
See, it makes sense in a weird sort of way if you don't know your Bible. And of course, I didn't know the Bible. I was 19 or so years old. I was a kid. And so finally, I found this book called King of the Witches. And it was the biography of Alex Sanders, who was this prominent witch over in England. And he claimed to be descended from Owen Glendowner, who was the last king of the witches. He reigned in Wales in I forget what century. But anyway, so I wrote this guy, and his wife answered me, and they connected me to a coven in Illinois where I was initiated as a witch. This was in 1968. And then over the next few years, finally, I ended up quitting the seminary because I realized the more I worked through all this stuff, the more I realized I didn't want to do the celibacy thing. Because, of course, witchcraft is heavily involved with sexuality.
Yes.
And I was discovering my manhood, so to speak. So anyway, I took a leave of absence from the seminary and started teaching high school. And, while I was there, I came in contact with a guy who's his nom de voyage, so to speak, his trade name was Eli, and he was the head of all the Druids in North America. He lived down in Arkansas, up in the hills of Arkansas, and he invited me to come down and study and become a high priest of the Druidic rite. So I did. I spent the whole summer of 73 in this kind of a witch commune up on top of this mountain and learned about organic stuff and herbalry. And again, this was in the 70s before this stuff became popular. I had to do things like milk goats and keep bees. And, a lot of it was really interesting, but it was heavily occult.
Right.
And not only that, but there were UFOs involved. I mean, he'd because it was deathly hot down there in Arkansas in the summer, as you can imagine.
Right.
And we'd sit on a mountaintop at night, and he would teach us things around this picnic table. And this UFO would come and hover over the mountain, and we would see it. It was as plain as if you were looking up in the sky and saw a dirigible or a blimp or something, And he just thought nothing of it. He's, don't worry about that. They were just watching us. So anyhow, I got ordained a high priest in the Druidic rite. Then the following fall, I went to Boston, to Plymouth, actually Massachusetts, where I got made a high priest, in the Alexandrian rite. And I was on my way, started covens all over Chicago and Milwaukee area. And really, I thought I was on the right path.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
When you're setting these covens up and everything, what is it? How often would you guys meet? What would you be doing? Because I can't imagine you guys would be sitting around watching the Flintstones or something, all get together and have popcorn and whatever. You guys were meeting for a purpose. I mean, what exactly would be going on at these various types of meetings?
Well, that's a good question. And you got to understand that more so now than then, there's a difference between different Wiccan traditions. That's, think of like a denomination, they call them traditions. And in our tradition back then, there would be a meeting on the full moon and then the meeting on the dark moon. Those would be the monthly things. And on the dark moon, we would do magical rituals for things that we wanted to grow, because, of course, the moon was starting to grow. And on the full moon, it was more of a big deal because we'd have this ceremony called the drawing down of the moon.
Right.
And, stuff like that. And anyway, it ended up being that that you would have like cakes and wine And we do rituals of healing, rituals of, like, say, if someone wanted to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, relatively harmless stuff, because white witches don't normally curse people.
Got it.
We just believed in doing good stuff. That's what Wicca is all about. Now, all of this has changed enormously over the decades, but it's just not a situation anymore that, where there's just like 2 or 3 traditions. There's like dozens of the things. But anyway, so that's what would go on. And then in addition to that, there's 8 major holidays in witchcraft, of which Halloween is the best known. But we're coming up on one in a week or so right now, the solstice, the summer solstice, the winter solstice, which is, around Christmas time.
Yeah.
It's called Yule.
Yule.
And then we have Beltane, which is May 1st. And then we have Lamastide, Ludnasa, which is August 1st. And then we have Harvest Home, which is the equinox in the fall. And then there's the spring equinox. So that's the witchcraft calendar, if you will. And there's special
that we actually follow. It goes on a 6-week and 7-week schedule.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, in a sense, it's a kind of a copycat counterfeit of the feasts of the Bible.
Yes.
Like the equinox in the spring is always related to the Passover feast. There's a correlation there, and so on and so on. But that's what the devil does. He can't come up with anything original, so he's a copycat. Yeah,
he is the ultimate counterfeiter. As I like to point out to people, if I went into a store and handed them a $100 bill from a Monopoly game, nobody would accept it. But if I worked very carefully and made that money look just like, as close as I possibly could, as the real thing, they would take it, because a counterfeit is only as good as how well it resembles the genuine article. And that's what the enemy is always trying to do, is to make it just good enough to fool people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So anyway, what happened is in the course of this thing, we're in Milwaukee, and had all these, I think I initiated 175 women into witchcraft over the course of about a decade.
Wow.
And anyhow, it ended up that the guy who ran the occult bookstore was sort of my contact there. He said I should read the Satanic Bible. And I didn't know what to make of that, because we were always taught, that witches don't believe in Satan. And he says, oh, you'll learn a lot of stuff from it. You should do that. Well, so I read the Satanic Bible, and I ended up liking some of the stuff. And again, this is the old camel putting its nose in the door. And I ended up writing to the Church of Satan and asking how to become a member of the Church of Satan. I joined the Church of Satan, and while I was there, I ended up with basically getting to be a warlock within that organization. And that's how I got involved. I ended up becoming a warlock in the Church of Satan, and was involved in that for several years. And hold on one second, excuse me.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's very interesting. And folks, if you're joining us late, we're here with Reverend Bill Schnoebelen. I hope I'm saying that right, Bill Schnoebelen. And he is a born-again Christian. He is a former witch and many other things. And we're going through some of his history right now so that you can understand better about some of these things that he's talking about. And if you do have comments during the program tonight as we're live, you can type your comments over and I will get them over to our guests. So, Bill, if you're ready, please continue.
Yeah, okay. So anyhow, so I got involved in that. And then I discovered that this guy down in Arkansas, Eli, he told me that if I really wanted to get deeper into the mysteries, I should become a Freemason. And I didn't know anything about Freemasonry at that point, of course, being raised Catholic.
Yeah.
And so it worked out that I was able to join a local Masonic lodge, and I moved up in the ranks of that and became ended up being a master Mason. I went through the York Rite, I went through the Scottish Rite, I went through the Shrine,
Wow.
all of that stuff over the course of several years, naturally. And all this time I was still a Satanist and a witch. We still had all these people meeting in witchcraft, things like that, coven meetings, and plus I got involved in Crowley, Aleister Crowley and the OTO, the Thelema thing. So, it was just becoming a big mess. And I detail some of this in my book, Lucifer Dethroned. The idea was that each of these different magical currents have a certain kind of impartation of energy. And as you go through your magical, whatever you want to call it, pilgrimage through life, you grab these different traditions and they all come together to make one unified whole eventually, if you're wise enough and you're enlightened enough and you're powerful enough. So, that's why I was into Crowley and Satanism and Masonry and all of these different things, And I thought things were going really well. I was foolish enough to believe in these things. I was very smart intellectually, but spiritually I was a dummy because I didn't know the Bible. I knew very little or any, even though I had, studied, in a Catholic minor seminary. And then later on at this time, I was actually going to a Catholic seminary to get a master's degree in theology. It was that strange. So, and yet at the Catholic seminary, all the guys around me were all homosexuals. They didn't have me read the Bible. They had me read Kierkegaard. They had me read Immanuel Kant, all these pagan philosophers or secular philosophers. The closest I got to being Christian was Thomas Aquinas, who of course was a great Catholic saint from about 1,000 years ago. But it was all just terrible stuff. And so anyhow, I was into all of these things. And at that point in my life, I think I'm getting this right. You alluded to this at the start of the program. I had sent a check to the Church of Satan, my due.
Yes.
And when the check came back from the bank, this lady had written on the check, "I'll be praying for you in Jesus' name." She was a bank officer out in Frisco, where the Church of Satan had its headquarters at that time. And I just laughed and threw it in the file and forgot about it. But what happened was literally within a day or two, I got hit with a Mack truck by some sort of power greater than my own. And I lost my job. I lost all my occult power. I was sick as a dog.
Wow.
Just like that. Because this one woman was praying for me. And I at the time, I was too arrogant to consider that. Because of course the devil is the king over the children of pride. And so I thought, okay, I'm supposed to have all this occult power. It's all gone. I've tried to serve Satan. I had people sign their souls up to the devil. I'd sold my soul to the devil. All of this terrible stuff. So I went up to I had this chapel in the attic of our house, painted entirely black, occult, magic, evil circle on the floor, all kinds of stuff, big statue of Pan, the horned god. And I prayed to Lucifer. And I said, "What's going on? Give me a sign." And anyway, the next day, and I love to say this, that this is a kind of a famous remark of mine, that even though I was praying to Lucifer, God came along and said, "Excuse me, I'll take this call." And just flicked Lucifer out of the way, And so what happened was I got a call from these two teenage satanic girls. They were teenage satanic groupies, and they wanted to come and meet me. They were in Chicago, and they wanted to give me a gift.
Okay.
Now, at this time, I just lost my job. I thought, well, everything going to give me money, sort of what the heck, So they came up on the train from Chicago, and we were talking in my living room, and they handed me these 2 chick comic books. They said, here, this is what we wanted to give you. It was Angel of Light and Spellbound. He said, these are about the occult, and you'll love them. They're so stupid. They're so Neanderthal. That was the word they used. And I glanced at them, and yeah, because I was into comic books at that time. And then I threw them in a drawer and forgot about them. Well, anyway, within the next day, see, the Almighty had given me a chance, and I just went like that because I was arrogant. The next day, there's a knock on the door, open the door, it's Mormon missionaries. Now, 6 years before, this Eli guy down in Arkansas had told us that if we ever got into deep spiritual trouble, join the Mormon church, because the Mormon church was started by witches for witches. And that might surprise a lot of you, but actually, after the fact, years later when I became a Christian, I found out that was true, and we can talk about that if you want. But anyhow, so I joined the Mormon church. That was in 1980. Baptized, confirmed, made an elder in 81, and he told me, this Eli guy, who was a Mormon bishop, by the way, in addition to being this high-level druid, he said, the Salt Lake Temple, which is kind of like the Vatican of Mormonism.
Yes.
That is, you go in there and you go through and you get your temple endowment. And if you want me to explain more about that, I can, but it's a special. Well, okay. See, most Mormons never go to the temple because they're not worthy. The temple, probably only 8 to 10% of the Mormons prove themselves worthy to go to the temple. Most Mormons just go to their meeting houses, which are like local, congregations,
local churches.
Yeah, right. Except they're called wards instead of churches. But it's, they have like a communion service on Sunday. Kind of most people that go there would probably not find it all that weird. The temple is weird. The temple is major weird, and we could do a whole show on that. But
so this would be kind of like Mecca to a Muslim. This would kind of be like for the Freemasons, the main temple or whatever it is down in Washington D.C. when people become a 33rd, et cetera, et cetera. So please continue.
Yeah. So we went out there and did the temple thing, and then I thought, okay, this is cool, because in the course of that, we had an interview with one of the 12 apostles, because this Eli guy, now understand this, he told us, now this is 6 years earlier, that when you get to the temple, the Salt Lake Temple, give them this key, this code. It was a word. And so at this time, this would have been 81, they had just installed a computer system in the temple to keep track of who was coming in, who was, kind of a sort of a primitive form of security. And this word was put into the computer. And of course, he wouldn't even have known that there would be a computer 6 years earlier.
Wow.
And the whole computer froze. It shut down the entire temple.
Wow.
And so they took us aside, and eventually I ended up meeting with the temple president, who was a pretty big dude. And he in turn arranged for me to meet with one of the 12 apostles. Now that's a big deal. And this apostle, who was at that time, I don't know if I think he's passed away probably, but he was Elder James Faust. And they had a private interview with him. And in that interview, in exchange of stuff, we told him that we had been led to believe through dreams and visions that Lucifer was the god of the Mormon temple. And he said, I bear you my solemn testimony. What you are telling me is true. And that's amazing. Amazing. If you know Mormon jargon, they when they say, I bear you my solemn testimony, it will usually be followed by something like, I know the Mormon church is true. I know it's reserved, if you will, for major huge truths. And, the funny thing about the Mormon church is it looks so all-American, plain vanilla, white picket fence, flag and apple pie. It's the quintessential American religion, and even with, its emphasis on hard work and all of that. And there's many things about it that are quite admirable. But here's the thing. It's just like any other cult or occult group. There's this outer facade, and then there's this inner thing. And
exactly,
if you go, and I'll invite anybody to do this, but before you go, be really prayed up. If you go to the Salt Lake Temple, they won't let you in, but they'll give you a tour of the grounds, the Mormon Tabernacle, and there's visitor centers. But if you look at that temple, or if you don't want to bother, you can get our DVD, which is called Mormonism's Temple of Doom, the 2011 edition. And in that DVD, I have pictures that I took personally in the Salt Lake Temple square of all of these occult symbols that are on the temple. You will not find a cross. You will find no conventional Christian symbols like, the fish symbol or a cross or anything like that. But you will find Masonic handshakes. You will find all-seeing eyes. You will find literally, Kevin, dozens of upside-down pentagrams chiseled into the temple.
Well, wasn't the founders, weren't they like 33rd degree Masons? I thought Joseph Smith was like a 33rd degree Mason.
He was a master Mason.
Okay.
He was a 3rd degree Mason. And later on, like Brigham Young and most of the early Mormon prophets were Freemasons. You're absolutely right. But Joseph Smith was also deeply into the occult.
Yes,
I was just sharing with a lady on Facebook this morning. His family was into the occult. His mother said in her autobiography that they cultivated the faculty of like abracadabra, and they drew magic circles in their floor. And he himself, he was a glass looker, which meant he used a crystal ball kind of thing. He was arrested for being a necromancer. And when he was shot, at the end of his life in Carthage jail by a mob, that was 1844, they found a Jupiter talisman in his pocket, which is like a magic coin that you can find these online. You can Google Jupiter talisman, and you will find a facsimile of the very coin that Joseph Smith had in his pocket. And you know what that coin is supposed to do? The magic it does? It was designed to either get him women or to give him political power. That was the two sides of the coin. And of course, at that time that we know of, he had 27 wives. And at that time, this is history, he was one of the leading candidates for president of the United States. Because at that time, the city he was in, which is an entirely Mormon city in southern Illinois called Nauvoo, it was the biggest city in Illinois. It was larger than Chicago, which might astonish someone nowadays.
That is remarkable.
But it was because all these thousands of people came there, again, kind of like the Mecca analogy. They came there because they thought, we're going to build Zion. We're going to, have heaven on earth, and then Jesus will come back, because they believe when the second coming happens, he's going to come to Missouri. Go figure. And anyhow, I kind of went off on a rabbit trail there.
No, that's all right.
So it's not like this Faust guy, this apostle, was just like a flake. He was actually operating in mainstream, hidden Mormon doctrine.
Well, the word occult means hidden or covered.
Yes.
If you put a blanket over something, you've occulted it, you've covered it. And so, what we see in the Bible is Jesus typically was going about uncovering all the works of the enemy. and uncovering the occult nature of people within Judaism at that time and other things going on in the society 2,000 years ago.
Well, yeah, and of course we're exhorted by Paul in Ephesians 5:11 that we are to expose the unfruitful works of darkness. And that's part of what our ministry does is we, whether it's, the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons or the Masons or whatever, we are here to share the truth of the Besorah, the gospel, but we're also here to expose the darkness and shine a light on the cockroaches so they flee.
So let me do this. Let me shift gears. Tell us how you got yourself out of all of that mess and became a Christian.
Right. Well, I tell people that Mormonism was like a spiritual decompression chamber for me because I was deep into Satanism. And of course, Mormons from the outside look very squeaky clean. They don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't chew, they don't go with girls that do. And so by becoming a Mormon, as you may have figured out by now, I'm kind of a compulsive overachiever. I was going to be the best Mormon I could be. So at that time, I had given up, and I think partly it was the influence of Christ. I had stopped the cocaine. I stopped using pot. I had given up hallucinogens sometime before that. So I was trying to lead, I stopped, like having orgies and, I was sexually faithful and all of this stuff because I really wanted to be a good Mormon. So it was kind of like a way of me to at least start to pretend to be a Christian.
Okay.
But like my colleague Ed Decker says, it's like just if you sit in the garage, it doesn't make you an automobile.
Exactly. Or a mechanic.
Right. Or in the same way, if you just say, okay, I'm a Christian, it doesn't make you a Christian. Going to a church, any church, doesn't make you a Christian. Even being baptized in water doesn't make you a Christian. Faith in Christ makes you a Christian. So I didn't understand any of this. And at that time, so I was a Mormon, and just to cut to the chase here, what happened was I was ordained as an elders quorum president, which meant I was right underneath the bishop of the local Mormon ward. And it was my job to do what in Christianity would be called pastoral care. I would send out elders that were under me to visit everybody every month and make sure they're doing good, see how they're doing. If it's an older person, do they need help like mowing the lawn or shoveling the sidewalks in the winter, something like that. See if they need food because, Mormons are big on having food storage. And anyway, so that was my job within the church. It was a huge job. I was working 40 hours a week for myself in retail sales in a store. And then I was working another 40 hours a week as this elders quorum president. No pay. That's something you got to hand it to the Mormons. None of the lower level people get any salary for the work they do. The bishops, the stake presidents, none of those people get paid for that. Of course, most of them are successful, businessmen or lawyers or whatever. But anyway, so I was out really working and I was exhausted. I was absolutely exhausted. One night, I was out teaching this guy, home teaching him, and he couldn't stop smoking. That's a big no-no in the Mormon church. You can't smoke or drink coffee or drink alcohol. And anyway, he was heartbroken because of the fact that he was smoking and couldn't give it up. He was stuck as just being a deacon. And normally in the Mormon church, a deacon is 12 years old. He knew he could never go to the temple. He could never take out his endowments. He was essentially damned, even though he was in the one true church, quote unquote.
Got it.
And I prayed for him. I put my hands on him and gave him priesthood blessings. We fasted together. He couldn't get victory over tobacco. And He was one of several, I could tell you many of those stories. But it kind of demoralized me because I thought, okay, I supposedly have the power of the holy Melchizedek priesthood, which Mormons believe. And I can't help this guy. I can't help a different person with a different issue. Someone who is struggling with porn and masturbation or whatever, whatever it might be. And it seemed like the church was failing a lot of the people. And so one night I came home exhausted. I threw open my Bible to try and read and they do use the King James Bible. So like I tell people, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yes,
and the
sir.
Mormon church gets that right. And so I was reading out of the King James Bible, and I just happened to come upon the Spirit, I know it was, told me, go to Matthew 11. So I went to Matthew 11, and I'm thinking about, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I mean, I'm paraphrasing that a little, but that's the gist of it. And I read that, and it just touched my heart. But I thought, well, man, if this is easy, what's hard? And then the Spirit said to me, go to Matthew 23:2. Now, I did not know the Bible. I had only been through the Bible one time as a Mormon. So I didn't even know it was in Matthew 23. And I went there, and of course, that's the thing where Yahushua, Jesus, is saying, woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, because you bind heavy burdens on people and grievous to be borne, and you will not lift a finger to help them. And that really smote me. I mean, I felt like I was being Pharisaical, because the Mormon church, I don't know if you know this, has over 4,000 commandments you have to keep to get to heaven. I mean, the Torah only has 613.
Right.
So that's like a factor of whatever it is, almost 10 times more commandments. And these people were failing. And I felt I was failing. And so I didn't know what to do. I was kind of floundering. We moved to another city because of a job thing. And I went out. I couldn't find work. And I saw this thing in the, in like the penny advertiser thing that most cities have for a prophecy meeting. And I thought, oh, good, I'll go and I'll steal some sheep, because I belonged to a church that was run by a living prophet, Spencer W. Kimball, who at that time was the head of the church. And so I thought, I'm going to really wow these people with my profound theological insights. I ever about to be humbled. So I went to this meeting, and the evangelist that was doing the show, but it had like a slideshow, and about the book of Revelation. And then we got into Q&A, and I started asking questions, and he just shot them down. This is the first time I'd ever dealt with an evangelical who really knew the Bible. In all my years in the occult, witchcraft, Mormonism, Masonry, I had never encountered a Christian who tried to witness to me. Now, to me, that's remarkable, but that's the way it was. So anyhow, finally, I said to this guy, I said, well, how do you have the authority to baptize people so they can be saved? Because, see, the Mormon church teaches that originally there was only one true church, and that was, Peter and the apostles. But then in the 2nd century, the church apostatized and went down, and it didn't get restored until Joseph Smith had the heavenly vision in 1830. So the Mormon church would say the Catholic Church is apostatized. The Protestant churches, which are offshoots of the Catholic Church, have no spiritual authority. So therefore, they can't baptize people. They can't do the sacramental ministry of the church because they have no spiritual authority. Well, this guy knew my issue. He kind of sidestepped the question, and he said, where do you get the authority that you need to be baptized to be saved? It says in Acts 16:31, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. And that's the verse that the Almighty had for me. And it went right through my magic Mormon underwear like a bullet through a sheet of tissue paper. And it just hit me in the heart. And I was trembling on the way home. Could it be that easy? Just have saving faith in Messiah, And I prayed and fasted for a whole week, because that's what you're supposed to do if you're a Mormon and you have a spiritual dilemma, and which is never a bad idea to pray and fast. But anyway, at the end of it, the Spirit brought to mind those comic books. I still had them in a drawer in the bottom of my closet. So I went out and got them, and I read through them, and I saw on the back of it, there's this thing, how to get born again. Well, I've tried every other godforsaken thing in the world. I might as well try this. So I took off my magic Mormon underwear because I didn't want anything between me and the Almighty. And sorry about that. And I knelt at the foot of the bed and prayed the prayer at the back of the comic book, and I got born again. And I felt such light and such freedom, like this great, I could literally feel being taken out of the kingdom of darkness, put into the kingdom of light. That was on June 22nd, 1984. And I started going to the Assembly of God Church at that time, because the pastor there had reached out to me when I was calling different churches, because I had all the cult stuff. And I had read Johanna Michelson's wonderful book, The Beautiful Side of Evil. I knew I had to get rid of it. And he said, yeah, sure, bring it on over. We've got a guy, a farmer who has an industrial furnace in his barn. We can even, like the metal stuff, like the swords and the things, we can throw it right in there and burn it. So and then I got called into the ministry soon after that. In fact, I'll tell you that story real quick.
Go ahead.
I was testifying before the Stake High Council of the Mormon Church, because as an elder, I had that right. I wanted to tell them about the real Jesus, the real Yahushua of the Bible, my testimony. And as I was sharing to these 12 men who were high-level Mormons in the state of Iowa, I saw this, the first time I ever saw a heavenly vision, other than when I was a little boy. I saw this vision of a concrete, like, I don't know, driveway or something, and this crack appeared in the driveway, and this beautiful flower started coming up out of the driveway, cracking the concrete or whatever, and it blossomed into this beautiful white rose. And I felt the Spirit speak to me and say, this is your calling. You're here to help people crack their way out of the occult and cults and come into the sunlight of the saving Besorah, the gospel of Messiah. And so about a year after that, I got called out to speak at this capstone conference that Ed Decker was doing in Salt Lake. Ed Decker being the guy that wrote the God Makers book, and really basically turned the Mormon church on its ear. He invited me to come out there and be part of his ministry. I worked with him for 5 years. And then in 92, we started with One Accord Ministries, and going like,
going like gangbusters, right?
Yeah, raising heaven on earth wherever we can. Hallelujah.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I got about 3 minutes left, 3-4 minutes. Is there anything that we haven't talked about over this last hour that you'd like to get out onto the air before we go bye-bye?
Well, I think I pretty much covered my personal story. I would just say we do have books out there about my testimony. We have a book on Masonry. We have a book on Mormonism. We have a video on Mormonism, a DVD. All of these things are available on our website at withoneaccord.org. And we also have a YouTube channel with now over 170 video teachings that I'm doing. Try to get one out every week. And we have a ton of free material available on our website. Again, withoneaccord.org. We have a lot of prayers, spiritual warfare teachings, and materials on Mormonism and Masonry, how to get out of Mormonism, how to get out of Masonry, things like that. So,
and your YouTube channel, how would people find that? Is there a name for it, or maybe they search your name?
Dr. William Schnoebelen. Just Dr. like William what you see down there. Yeah.
Got it. And then they can find it. And those videos are generally how long?
Oh, they vary from 5 or 6 minutes all the way up to nearly an hour.
Okay. So you're covering a wide range.
Oh, yeah. Everything from the Torah to cult apologetics to even health topics, because I'm a naturopathic physician too.
Okay.
So we get into some of that stuff. Not a lot of the videos are about that, but we have a wide variety of topics. We just did a thing on a 2-part series on the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example.
Pretty intense stuff. I love it. Folks,
Yeah.
I hope you've enjoyed the last hour, and we've been here with Dr. Bill Schnoebelen, and I'm, of course, Kevin Gallagher. You've been watching my show. You can check us out every single Friday night at 8:30 p.m. if you're watching in the greater Danbury, Connecticut area on TV. You can also go and check us out. And Bill, hang out for a while after we get off the broadcast. I want to talk to you. We can also be seen here on YouTube, here on Twitch, and here on Facebook. And you can hear us Friday nights at 9 p.m. And that is on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. And you can check us out. The Truth Be Told Radio Network broadcasts a number of different ways, too. You can check us out with a smart speaker by Amazon, by Google, by Apple with the Siri. You can also connect to us through your smartphone, because believe it or not, your smartphone has the same, if you're using an Android phone, that has the same Google Assistant built into it that the smart speaker has. And the same thing is true with your Apple iPhone. It's the same Siri that's in the smart speaker is the same one that's in the phone. So you can just call it up, ask for it, just use that wake word and ask to play the Truth Be Told Radio Network. You're listening. You can also hear the network through TuneIn Radio in a variety of different ways. Just go to truthbetoldnetwork.org and you can listen right there. 24/7, 24 hours a day, wide range of subject matter, stuff like what we covered here tonight, and a lot more. So, folks, you can also check me out if you want to just go into a search engine, search for my name. That's just put in Kevin Gallagher. You'll find reams and reams of stuff that's out there, and that's fantastic. Bill, I want to thank you so much for being on the program. His website, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, is withoneaccord.org. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and real quick, in about 30 seconds, what type of things can they find there on the website?
Well, as I said, we have all of our books and DVDs for sale.
Yes.
We have a lot of free materials that people can download. We have Vimeo, where people, like a lot of people that are in foreign countries, they have trouble with the shipping with DVDs. So we have many of our DVDs available for substantially less money. You can just download them or rent them off of Vimeo. Got it. So and we have prayers that people can download if they don't know how to, like pray over their home to bless it. Just that kind of handy tools for your spiritual warfare toolbox.
Fantastic. Bill, thank you so much for joining me here on the program tonight. I'm, of course, Kevin Gallagher. Please tune in again next week to see what it is we'll be talking about. And folks, you have a great night, and we'll join you again next week.